Before we begin with a little review of what we covered yesterday, is there any questions about self or the practice we just did?
You came to a point where you pointed the self or the me for the one who is relaxing the body or
Focusing the mind.
But you didn't relate to the me who is experiencing it.
It's the same me.
Because I could let go of this me that is giving orders to the system to make some, but I couldn't let go of this me that is experiencing it all.
Is that the same or the different me?
It's different level, different layer.
Okay, then in a separate practice, look for that me. Look for that me.
Because for a moment, I could feel that everything is just rising from causes and conditions, and this me and so on. There was a minute of real emptiness, I felt.
Right, and then what happens is we grasp to that as the real me. That's often what happens, is when because we want to hold on to something. So if we don't find it, and then often what happens is you have that spaciousness, or people sort of have that sense of awareness, and they go, oh, that's the real me. Yes, I found it. It's awareness. That's me. Then look for that. Look for that. Because we always want to hold on to something. So,
it was a new experience. It was something, that it means.
Right.
I started meditating and I realized that I thought, and there was kind of coming back to the breath.
Right.
I felt the same here.
Sure. Yeah, that's good. That's a good sign. It means that we're doing the search well, and we're coming to see that the me that we've been holding on to our entire life is simply not there. And that's quite shocking, So if you get to that point, then just rest in that experience of that me is not there. Don't then go off on a tangent and grab hold of something else. Because it's like, example, let's say we're looking for a person in a house, and we know the house has just 2 rooms, and our mission is to find out, is that person in the house? So we go into the first room, we don't see them. We go into the second room, we don't see them. Do we keep searching then? We don't, do we? We just stop and go, they're not in the house. We stay there. They're not in the house. Similarly here, we looked in the body, we looked in the mind, didn't find. It's not to be found. We don't go off then and do something else. So just stay there in that experience.
Just another phenomena. Just another phenomena.
Well, so what I did was, if we do the search well, and particularly if we go, ooh, like this, just stay in that experience of not finding. Just hold that. Stay there. That's an experience of no self. The more we can stay there, the more that will penetrate the mind, the more it will have an effect after the meditation. So just stay there. Don't go off and go, well, I'm experiencing awareness, so that must be the self. Then we've gone completely out of the practice. Of course, a separate practice could be look at awareness and see if there's a self there, but that's not the practice here. So we don't want to go off on a tangent. Just stay with that experience that there's no self there to be found. Stay there. What I did was I added a little bit to the practice at the end to help us to appreciate that not finding doesn't mean no me. So normally you probably wouldn't add that to the practice, but I just put that in there at the end just to help us to, particularly if we have this sort of shock and fear and so forth, to really say, well, okay, we didn't find, but that doesn't mean there's no me. There is a me. So you wouldn't normally add that to the emptiness meditation unless you're having fear to try and help overcome that. But normally you would just stay in that experience of not finding till the end of the practice. And generally what will happen is if we have that experience and we stay there, probably after a few seconds we're distracted or whatever, then the recommendation is go back, search again. If you don't find, then again hold that experience. And that's why the shamatha practice is so important for this wisdom practice. Because if we don't have some stable, clear mind, one, we're not going to be able to search well, and two, even if we get to the point of not finding, we're not going to be able to hold that experience. It'll dissipate very quickly, so it won't have much impact. But if we've got better, more calm, clear, focused mind, and we get to that point, we can hold that experience much longer, and it will penetrate much deeper into the mind and have a much more profound effect outside of the meditation.
I did this meditation many times, but now I was looking for the self, and definitely I didn't find it in the body, but in the mind I thought maybe I found it. So it was a little bit confusing at the beginning, because I thought maybe it's something in my mind conceptually. I think it's a me, and like a commander or something giving orders or something like this. And then when I'm calmed down, so it calms down also, I can be very relaxed. But when something happens or something I need to think, I need to do something, it's again like it's separated from the mind, but it's part of the mind. Right. That's what I thought.
Right. Well, one thing is not to make this into an intellectual exercise. And that's often what people do. And often they'll always come up with an answer based on their belief system. You know? Like if we've studied some Buddhist things and we hear about this subtle mental continuum going from life to life, we'll search and we'll go, oh yeah, I'm the subtle mental continuum. Yeah, okay, that's me. Or if we're more maybe Christian background, we'll go, well, I can't really see it, but I know I'm the soul. I'm the soul. That's me. Good. Found it. Or if we've studied more New Age philosophy that says basically everything in the universe is subtle energy, subtle vibration, we'll go and we'll feel some subtle energy in the body. We'll go, yep, that's me. I'm subtle energy.
What about Jewish?
I don't know. Whatever belief. So, and I can guarantee that when we get angry, we're not identifying as me as subtle mental continuum or soul or subtle energy in the body. That's not the me that's getting angry. So we need to be careful that this whole meditation, we don't turn it into an intellectual exercise, that we're looking. So again, using the example of looking for a person in a house in 2 rooms, if I say, look, is that person in the house? You don't go, let me think. Maybe, I don't think they'll be in that house because they wouldn't like that house and I think they're somewhere else. And no, they're not in the house. Is that proving anything? Nothing, nothing. We just need to look. So similarly in this practice, yeah, you're looking with your mental awareness directly, not intellectualizing. I mean,
okay, but after you must analyze it. How do you analyze it?
Well, you don't see. The analysis is only understanding that I need to look here. I need to look here. If I don't find it in those 2 places, it doesn't exist. That's the analysis. And then you just look. You look in the body, you look in the mind, didn't find, therefore it does not exist, and just stay there. Yeah. So then if you think you've found the me, what you found must have all the qualities of me, because it's me. So what you found, does that weigh so many kilos, certain height, the qualities of you? So it must have all the qualities of you because it's you. Right, but you, let's say you weigh so many kilos. If you found you, that must weigh so many kilos because it's you.
It's not a matter.
So the thing you found doesn't have a body, but you have a body. Then it's not you. It can't be, because we're looking. So if it's part of you, it can't be you, by definition. If something is part of something, it can't be that thing. Correct?
The wheel is not the car.
Yeah. So if you found something that's part of your mind, that proves it's not you, because your mind is part of you. Isn't it?
Why do the mind can be parts? Like the body have parts?
Yeah, the mind has parts. It has thoughts, emotions, memories, all of these parts.
Mind, like.
Right. And therefore, it can't be you. Because if it's part of the mind, and the mind is part of you, how can that be you? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Why?
Why? Can this be, if this is a part of a pen, can it be a pen? I mean, it can't be.
It can be a pen.
Well, then it's not part of a pen. You can't be a part and the whole at the same time. Isn't it? No? No? Okay.
A nagging question.
A nagging question, yeah.
I assume that this is not an exercise in intellectual.
No, no, absolutely not. Then we're just a philosopher.
Okay, so I was asking myself, what is the purpose? Where are we heading to? I can say what I think, but if I'm wrong, I'll be happy if you could correct me. I assume that the idea behind this intellectualizing is to realize, no, not to realize, to bring me to a position that I will treat others in a better way, to be more compassionate, because there is no me, so don't be so hugging yourself, blah, blah, blah. You know, be larger, be nicer, be something, because anyway, Buddhism says there is no me and you are attached to something doesn't exist, whereas the me is not here, blah, 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 blah. But if I come back, the idea is, I mean, if we can jump all this, the basic idea of
Okay, yeah.
no, I say,
Yeah, exactly.
if I would ask you to summarize everything in one sentence, so what you want to tell me, Mayor, be more passionate, don't be so busy with yourself and taking care of yourself. Bring a glass of water to your neighbor.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly the point, is that it's this grasping to self that we looked at briefly yesterday, and we're going to look at, we got an extra chart today, this one. It's this grasping to self that causes attachment to pleasant things, aversion to unpleasant things. It causes us to get angry at people, to hate people, to get jealous, to all of these things is because of that. And that's why we suffer and inflict suffering on others. So this is not just some sort of philosophical exercise. The bottom line is, by doing this practice, as Shantideva says here, therefore those who desire to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. He didn't say knowledge, he said wisdom. So this is a very important point. And with this practice, actually any practice, we go through 3 stages. And I like to use the Tibetan words because they're very short. Go Nyam Tok. Go is intellectual. So first we need to get an intellectual understanding, like to understand what do we mean by self, and understand intellectually, through reasoning and logic, how this grasping to me creates suffering. Because if we don't understand that, what are we going to do? We're just going to suffer and think, well, they caused me to suffer. They're to blame. That's to blame. Everything there is to blame. And my happiness is there. So if we don't do this, why are you going to meditate on this? If someone says, just meditate on this, you go, what for? Because you won't understand the reason to do this. But if we reflect on this and we understand this, what is this self I'm grasping to, and see, which we're going to do later, how the process of that grasping to self leads to attachment, aversion, jealousy, hatred, anger, how it leads to that and creates so much suffering for ourselves and others. If we understand that, then we'll go, okay, let's just see if we can do something about that. But if you leave it there, nothing's going to change. So what we need to do then is, let's now see if there really is this self that seems to be here, that seems to be the root of all of my problems. Because intellectually, even if you intellectually believe there's no such me here, that's not going to change anything. Nothing. So what we need to do then is go to the next step. We need to look for this me. And we need to meditate to come to taste that there is no me here. That's what we just did. That's Nyam. That's taste or experience. So we sit down based on our intellectual understanding, because if we don't have that, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to say they're to blame for my suffering. Them. Let's get angry at them because they're causing me suffering. Let's get rid of them. But then if we meditate and we get to this point where we have this, and we do it in a very methodical way, it's not just random, it's a methodical investigation like an empirical scientist. And then we really come to this point, wow, there's no, that me that I've believed in is not there. And if we can hold that, that's affecting our mind, because our mind now is grasping to that self. So we need something to opposite that. And intellectual is not enough to oppose that, because that grasping is strong and instinctive. If we do this, and particularly if we have pretty good focus, that experience is going to at least temporarily weaken that. So much so that after the meditation, this grasping to me will be very much reduced. So what you will notice, if this is quite strong in meditation, when you get out of meditation, you'll notice, wow, my mind's pretty calm. I'm not getting so agitated, angry, jealous. Those things don't seem to be like before. And actually, I feel sort of closer to people. I feel naturally more kind to people. So that would then reconfirm, this experience would confirm what we've intellectually understood here, that this is really the cause of suffering. But that will wear off. It'll wear off. I mean, it may be there for a few moments, few minutes, few hours. So we need to go to the next stage, Tok. And that is realization. So what that means is that we want to be able to come to directly see this no self. Now we sort of have this sort of experience that's not very profound. So to get from here to here, we need a much more calm, clear, focused mind. That's why we need to practice shamatha. If we don't practice shamatha, at best we can get something here which will temporarily have a little positive impact in our life, and it'll wear off, it'll wear off, it'll wear off.
Why?
Because it's not a direct insight. It's not a full direct experience of no self. It's a sort of a approximation of the real experience. Yeah? Whereas this, we directly see. Directly see. It's a little bit like maybe the analogy, you know, sometimes when people get a bit lucid in a dream, they're sort of half lucid. They can sort of think, oh, this is a dream, but then they still go to the wall and they go, it's a dream, but I can't seem to put my hand through the wall, because they're still grasping. Whereas if you're 100% lucid, you just go, woof, put your hand through the wall, no problem. You have no doubt. So this is a bit like this here, is that you directly see no self, like with a very clear, focused mind of shamatha, and you penetrate fully. You have a full experience, direct experience of no self, and that has a very strong effect on this grasping.
So the Nyam is just an approximation of the real thing.
Yeah, it's a real thing. In fact, here, particularly if we're talking emptiness now, in that experience, when you're in the middle of the experience, you'll still, in the middle of the meditation, if you're experiencing this no self or emptiness, you'll still have a sense, I am experiencing this. That's Nyam. Here, there's no sense of I at all. If you're in the middle of a meditation and you're having an experience of no self or emptiness and you're going, I'm directly realizing emptiness, 100% proof you're not. That's proof you're not. Because here, in that experience, there's no sense of self at all. Zero. So all there is the experience of emptiness. And it's when you come out of it, you go, yes, that was a direct experience. And from this, that is stable and long-lasting. But then, of course, we need to go through some stages here to then move to nirvana and enlightenment. So one direct realization is not going to wipe it all out. But this is really the sort of the, once we get here, we're on a one-way ticket out of samsara.
So how yesterday you discussed the experience of no self that musicians.
Well, that's not an experience of no self. This is simply a temporarily reduction in grasping.
Okay.
That's not an experience of emptiness.
Not nyam.
It is a nyam. It's an experience. I mean, everything is nyam, really, but not this nyam. But if you are very intuitive and you've done a little bit of thinking about things and you had that experience, you may intuitively come to some insight. That me is not there. But otherwise, it'll just be a very nice, spacious experience. Things will be flowing, and you go, wow, that's really nice. And that's all. And that's good.
Then you start holding.
And then you just start craving that experience and say, I want that. That was so nice. But if you're very intuitive, and particularly if you have, and I think with artists and musicians, through what they're doing, they think a bit about what music means and art means, and if they're really reflecting on that, they can get some intellectual understanding of interdependency and no separate me. And then when they have that experience, then they can say, okay. And then you can get some insight. But otherwise, it's just a nice experience. That's all. Whereas if you actually search, like for example, again, the example of looking for a person in a house, if you were looking for the person and you looked there and they didn't find, then that's nyam into emptiness. But if you just by chance looked in that house without is that person there, you would have an experience of not seeing anyone, but there's no insight, is there? There's just an empty house. There's no insight that person is not in the house. But if you somehow knew or thought that they were supposed to be in the house, and then you had that experience, then there'd be some insight.
It's not when it happens once every 2 or 3 years. My personal experience is surprise. Who was here? Who was here?
Yeah.
Who was playing?
Exactly. So then you've had an experience, and then you've asked the question. So then now insight can come. But if you're just resting in that experience, you could go, oh, this is very nice.
No, for me it was like spooky, scary kind of a thing.
Right, because again, you're probably...
What the hell was here now?
Exactly, you've gone into questioning mode. You've gone, where is the me? When you're having that experience. Then you can get insight. So yes, it can. That's why if you're intuitive and you really start to ask those questions, then you can really have an insight in that experience. Particularly if you have some intellectual background of understanding, and then you have that experience, then it can really be an experience of emptiness or no self. Right, let's go to the text now. Maybe just a couple of things again before we go to the next verse. So remember, we said in that verse that those desiring to pacify suffering should generate wisdom. And we saw there that for the Vaibhashika Sautrantika, that wisdom is the wisdom of no self. And that for the Chittamatra and Madhyamika, they talk about emptiness. So the wisdom here we need to cultivate is this: there's no autonomous self here, nothing more than the body and the mind. And through that, we can pacify suffering. Mental affliction, suffering, and achieve liberation. But Chittamatra and Madhyamika go further. They say, yes, that's a good thing to do, but we need to go deeper. We need to strip away more stuff we're throwing on top. And for Chittamatra, of course, they're saying that this world that seems to be there, this material external world, doesn't exist. So they say we need to realize emptiness, and often they use the word non-duality, but for them, emptiness means no external world. Madhyamika, like Chittamatra, also refute this world that seems to be there, this independent external world, but they come to a different conclusion. Chittamatra say there is no external independent world because there's internal independent world. The world is the nature of the mind. There's no material things at all. Seems like, but there's not if you investigate. Just like lucid dream example. And so Madhyamika says, no, we agree with you that what they assert doesn't exist, but it means that there is an external dependent world. So emptiness here means no independent world. And of course, therefore, no independent me. So even though they use the same word emptiness, it doesn't have the same meaning. And in fact, what we're going to see in the verses now is that the Madhyamikas refute both the Vaibhashya and the Chittamatrans. So they're going through the process now of refuting those views in terms of no self and emptiness. And so that's where we are in the presentation now. We're just starting that in the text.
Sorry? Dependent arising is only Madhyamika?
No. So, in fact, remember yesterday when we introduced the... So the question is, dependent arising is only Madhyamika? The answer is no. All Buddhist philosophical systems assert dependent arising.
That's what I saw.
But how they understand it differs. Because for all schools, of course, things exist depending on causes and conditions and parts.
Okay.
But then when we talk about labeling, that's something unique to Madhyamika. Because in all the lower philosophical systems, for things to exist, they must be findable. We must be able to say, that's it, there it is. So it's only the Madhyamikas which would assert that things are merely labelled. Because all the others assert true existence, that things exist from their own side. So even though they all assert dependent arising, only Madhyamikas accept that third one we looked at yesterday, that things are merely labelled. They only exist within our conceptual framework. The others would not accept that. In fact, the other philosophical systems would say that is nihilism. If you say that, things don't exist.
What I wondered was about Chittamatra, because if everybody believes in dependent arising, and the Chittamatra believes that everything that exists is only in your mind, is whatever.
Internal to the mind, yeah.
To the mind.
Right.
Then the external world...
There is no external world for Chittamatra.
1 second. The external world would be dependent arising. If
But in Chittamatra there is no external world.
Yeah, but if everything is dependent arising, then what do? They block.
No, but I mean...
So the non-external world should be dependent arising on something.
Right, causes and conditions and parts. So that...
So they say that there are no causes
Well, the external world doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. The world exists. Cup exists for Chittamatra. And this cup, it seems to be material, but if we look closely, we'll realize it's not material. But there's still a cup that depends on causes and conditions and parts, but it's internal to the mind. It's mental.
So why not imputed?
Sorry?
So why not imputed?
Because all the lower philosophical systems say that for something to exist, it must be findable. It must be findable. It can't be merely imputed. Otherwise, it can't exist. That's all the three lowest systems say this. So Chittamatra do not negate causes and conditions and parts. They just negate that that is made up of matter. That's all.
So the no external world depends on non-matter.
It's mental stuff. It's mental stuff, like a lucid dream. In a dream, there seems to be matter, yeah? But if you become lucid, even though it seems to be matter, you realize it's not matter. But the dream world still is functioning. I mean, it has different rules to the waking world, of course. But by realizing that it's not matter, it's still a dream world. It's still there. No? Okay. And what we saw there yesterday was that in the Madhyamika view here of dependent arising, this idea of merely labelled is very difficult to really appreciate, which of course is the flip side of emptiness, because we are stuck in the two extremes of existence and non-existence. Now we're stuck in the extreme of existence. We're grasping onto independent me, independent world. And we start to undermine that through our investigation into emptiness, to look for that independent world that seems to be there, to look for the independent me that seems to be here. And if we can't find it, for us, that seems to imply there's no me and no world. Because the only me and world that we've seen is the one that supposed independent me and independent world. So we only see there's two choices, two options. Either there is an independent me and world, or there's no me and no world. And so therefore, the investigation into emptiness often leads us to wrongly assume, therefore, there's no me and no world. That's why when we start this investigation, particularly with respect to me, the person, we look for the me, the person, and we don't seem to be able to find it, one of the most common experiences is fear, existential fear, because we're stuck in the two extremes. Because we don't seem to be able to find the me that we believe in, the only me we've seen our entire life. And so therefore, we wrongly assume then there's no me at all. But the correct understanding, of course, is we're just coming to see there's no independent me. So actually the fear, when we're doing this investigation, is usually a good sign. It means we're doing the investigation well, but we are misinterpreting the result, the not finding. We're misinterpreting it as mean no me. But of course the simple answer to that is, if you're having fear arising, who's having the fear? Because if you don't exist, there can be no fear. So the fact that fear is arising proves you exist. And of course it's irrational fear, because the only thing going out of existence is a false grasping to me. And if we think about it, it's actually quite crazy. Something that never has existed, cannot exist, will never exist, is the root cause of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. A non-existent is the root cause of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. It's only because we believe it exists, we suffer. So this is what this practice is about, is to come to realize we do not exist in this way. And we saw there yesterday that what this labeling means. Remember again, to make sense or meaning out of our experience, we draw lines, we create objects, and we give them names. And of course, one of the first lines we draw in every experience is we draw a line around here, and create me. Because there's single experience. And in single experience, there are two aspects. There's experiencer and experienced. And we need to distinguish those two aspects in single experience. Otherwise, there's no sense or meaning. So nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, of course, we don't realize we're doing that. We turn this line into a boundary. We grasp onto the me part of the experience and see ourselves as independent of what we experience. That's called self-grasping. But again, that's exactly like saying this is big. It's completely irrational. So therefore, we are to, in this investigation into emptiness, is to realize there's no boundaries. But no boundaries doesn't mean we're all one. You know, often I hear people say, oh, we're all one. That's wrong. That's not true. Because that is still stuck in the two extremes. Because we're stuck in duality. And so for us, two things are either the same or different. So realizing that two things are not different, independent, doesn't mean they're one. One means the same. Big and small are not different, but they're not one. Is big and small one? Are they the same? No. They're not different. So actually, we can't say everything's one, because one is dualistic talk. One can only exist if there's two. All we can say is things are not two, or non-dual. Big and small are not two, they're non-dual. But that does not mean they're one. They're not the same. So therefore,
Can you repeat it once again, what you just said?
yeah. So big and small are not different, because different means this is big, this is small. But when we realize they're not different, doesn't mean they're one, same. Because for us, two things are either the same or different. They're the only two options. So if we negate different, then we think, oh, they're same, they're one. But they're not one, they're not the same. And that's why, because we're stuck in these two extremes. We're stuck in duality. So that's why we wrongly think that therefore everything's one, but it's not. All you can say is that they're not two, non-dual. Big and small are distinct, but they're not different. They're non-dual. They exist relationally. So remember, then, in our investigation of emptiness, a measure that we are going in a correct direction within emptiness is, in our investigation of emptiness, if at the same time we can hold on to functioning world. If we start to lose that, start to negate functioning world, then we've gone astray in our emptiness investigation. Because often in the beginning we think they seem to be contradictory. Either there is this real functioning world, or everything's empty and nothing really exists. Seems to be contradictory. But the real measure of understanding of emptiness is, because things are empty, they can function. And because things function, they must be empty. So remember that quote from Nagarjuna yesterday. That which arises dependently and relatedly is explained as being empty. And that which is empty is dependently designated. This is the middle way path. So emptiness and dependent arising or functioning world are two sides of one coin. Two sides of one coin. That is from the Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, chapter 24, verse 18. It's a quote, if you have that text somewhere.
What's the Sanskrit name for the text?
Mula Majjhimika Karika. So, question. You had a question, sorry.
I have a small doubt. You're saying that we having this sense of self, of unchanging, independent.
Unitary. That's a very coarse one. That's easy to let go of.
And we are grasping with it, we have a feeling that we need to protect it and so on, and this is a problem. But I think intuitively, if we have a feeling that we need to protect it, it means that we understand that it can be affected by something else. So it's not unitary, independent, unchanging.
Right. But again, we're talking instinctive versus intellectual. So I think many people in this room, maybe everyone nearly, intellectually has this understanding. I mean, we look at climate change, we look at all sorts of things. We understand intellectually interdependency at some level, don't we? I think, yeah? Exactly like you said. But is that how we intuitively experience things in the moment? That everything's interdependent. So this is the problem, is that if we only leave it as intellectual, we may have a correct intellectual understanding of interdependency and we still react with jealousy, hatred, anger, craving, because that's not going to shift anything intellectually.
What I'm saying that if we had an intuitive
insight,
intuitive understanding that intuitive false understanding that we
intuitive
are
false understanding, we're not, yeah.
Then why would we fear intuitively?
Because unchanging is stable, and the way it is now I like, and I don't want that to change in a bad way. I want to hold on to this me. Okay, it's not great, but but it's okay. So anything that may disrupt that me, I have a lot of fear for, because I know this me. I'm comfortable with this me. It's not the best, but I'm comfortable with it. So anything that's a threat to this me that could cause some bad influence, I want to fight against that. But what we need to remember is that letting go of that doesn't mean we sort of dissolve into nothing. We all become one big nothing. And that we won't protect ourselves if some danger comes. But what it does mean is that we won't, when some difficulty arises, we won't react with hatred, anger, and all these mental afflictions. We'll respond with compassion. So it's not like if we do this no self, that somehow we'll sit there and we'll allow someone to physically beat us up. That's not going to happen. I mean, now if someone's trying to physically attack us, then we react, often overreact because of hatred and use excessive force, and the whole thing gets a mess. If we can release this false grasping, if someone is attacking us, actually what you'll be seeing more is this person is creating a lot of suffering for themselves and others. Let's help that person. And if we need, let's physically restrain that person. Rather than he's attacking me, let's beat him up. That's not going to be helpful. Okay.
Chapter and verse, you said?
18, chapter 24, verse 18.
24:18.
24:18, yeah. In fact, there's one other quote on that, and then it's actually time for a morning tea break. On chapter 24, verse 36, he says, "Whoever invalidates the emptiness of dependent arisings invalidates all the conventions of the world." So this is the measure of being able to hold a good view of emptiness, is can we have emptiness and a functioning world together in one mind? In fact, because they're two sides of a coin. And that is really the measure of a good understanding of emptiness. Maybe one more thing and then we'll take a tea break. We talked about the two truths yesterday. So if we just go to verse 2, it said the concealer, the conventional, and the ultimate are asserted to be the two truths. So we saw there that the two truths are defined differently in the four schools, that in the first two schools, Vaibhashika Sautrantika, the way in which the world appears and the way in which it exists matches. That there seems to be an independent objective world there, and that's how things really are. So for them, the two truths, there's no discrepancy between appearance and reality. So remember, for Vaibhashika, they look at that world and they say, they see the ultimate truth is, what is that world made up of? And so they go down to the sort of like atomic level and say that's ultimate truth because that is the basis of this world. Whereas the Sautrantika sort of take it a little bit further. And they they're starting to move a little bit closer to Madhyamika and Chittamatra, because Sautrantika are saying, yeah, there is an external world there, but we relate to that through convention, through names. So the ultimate truth is that physical world, and conventional truth is just simply all the conventions, all the names we give to those things. So already they're sort of moving a little bit closer than Vaibhashika to the Madhyamika. So, but both of them again are saying that there is an independent world there, whereas in the Chittamatra and Madhyamika, of course, both of them say that there is a discrepancy between appearance and reality. The reality is emptiness. Of course, different understanding of emptiness here. And then the appearance, of course, in both cases, the way in which things appear is deceiving us. So we have the idea that conventional truth, one of the ways of translating that samvritti, which is translated as conventional truth, is concealer truth. Concealer truth, that this appearance, this world, is only true for the mind of ignorance. It's concealing how things actually exist. And so then in Madhyamika, I'd like to just read one quote, or one part of a book here called What Makes You Not a Buddhist? By Songsa Khyentse, and he's talking about the two truths here on page 66, and he says the following, and then we'll take a tea break. In Buddhist philosophy, anything that is perceived by the mind did not exist before the mind perceived it. It depends on the mind. It doesn't exist independently, therefore it doesn't truly exist. That is not to say that it doesn't exist somewhat. Buddhists call the perceived world relative truth, or conventional truth, a truth that is measured and labelled by our ordinary minds. In order to qualify as ultimate truth, it must not be fabricated, it must not be a product of the imagination, and it must be independent of interpretation. Although Siddhartha realized emptiness, emptiness was not manufactured by Siddhartha or anyone else. Emptiness is not the result of his revelation, nor was it developed as a theory to help people be happy. Whether or not Siddhartha taught it, emptiness has always been emptiness. Although paradoxically, we can't even really say that emptiness has always been, because it is beyond time and has no form. Nor should emptiness be interpreted as negation of existence. That is, we can't say that this relative world doesn't exist either, because in order to negate something, you have to acknowledge that there is something to negate in the first place. Emptiness does not cancel out our daily experience. Siddhartha never said that something spectacular, better, purer, or more divine exists in place of what we perceive. He wasn't an anarchist refuting the appearance or function of worldly existence either. He didn't say that there is no appearance of a rainbow or that there is no cup of tea. We can enjoy our experience, but just because we can experience something doesn't mean that it truly exists. Siddhartha simply suggested that we examine our experience and consider it that it could be just a temporary illusion, like a daydream. If someone asked you to flap your arms and fly, you would say, I can't, because in our experience of the relative world, it is not physically possible to fly. But suppose that you are asleep and dreaming that you are flying through the sky. If someone in the dream says, human beings can't fly, you will say, yes, I can, see, and you will fly away. Siddhartha would agree on both counts. You can't fly when you're awake, and you can fly when you're asleep. The reasons are the causes and conditions that have or have not come together. A condition necessary to be able to fly is to be dreaming. When it is not there, you can't fly. When it is, you can. If you dream that you are flying and continue to believe that you can fly even after you wake up, that becomes a problem. You will fall and you will be disappointed. Siddhartha says that even when we wake up in the relative world, we are asleep with ignorance. When the right causes and conditions come together, anything can appear. But when those conditions are exhausted, the appearances stop. Viewing our experience in this world as a dream, Siddhartha found that our habit of fixating on the mere appearance of our dream-like relative world, thinking that it is truly existing, throws us into an endless cycle of pain and anxiety. We are in a deep sleep, hibernating like a silkworm in a cocoon. We have woven a reality based on our projections, imagination, hopes, fears, and delusions. Our cocoons have become very solid and sophisticated. Our imaginings are so real to us that we are trapped in the cocoon. But we can free ourselves simply by realizing that it is all our imagination. There must be infinite ways to wake up from this sleep. Even substances like peyote and mescaline might give us a vague notion of the illusory aspect of reality. But a drug cannot provide a total awakening, if only because this awakening is dependent on an external substance. And when the effect of the mescaline is gone, the experience is gone as well. Suppose that you are having a really bad dream. All it takes is a flicker of realization that you are dreaming to wake you up. The spark can come from within a dream. When you do something anomalous or strange within the dream, you may be jostled into realizing that you are asleep. Peyote and mescaline can spark a short-lived realization by revealing the power of the mind and the imagination. Hallucinations help us temporarily recognize how tangible and believable illusions can be. But such substances are not advisable because they provide only an artificial experience, one that can actually harm the body. Instead, we should have the aspiration to wake up once and for all, without depending on external input. We are much better off when realization comes from within. What we really need is to wake up from our habitual patterns, imagination, and greed. Mind training and meditation are the swiftest, safest, and most effective ways to work within the mind stream. As Siddhartha said, you are your own master. So let's take a morning tea break there, and we've run over time, so let's take 30 minutes. So let's come back at 5 to 12. We'll start in 30 minutes' time.